2017, the Libertarian Union was formed. Finally, the average Joe Libertarian could find a thriving community of independent podcasters and content providers, all in one convenient location. At Libertarian Union, we'll always have the latest news, interviews, discussions, and even movie reviews. With hundreds of episodes and more added all the time, you'll always find something fresh at libertarianunion.com.
All right. Let's get fired up here.
Maximum freedom. Read.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom. Read Rothbard.
Hello and welcome to the Actual Anarchy podcast, the podcast where we talk about movies from a Rothbardian, anarcho-capitalist perspective. Tonight we're going to do a recommended movie from someone in our cadre. They said, hey, here's a movie that has some pretty interesting stuff worth talking about and a pretty terrible subject matter just in general. So I'm sure you guys will love it. I think they're trying to torture us, actually. But this is episode 85 of the podcast, and we're going to be talking about the King's Speech. Speaking of kings, how you doing, Robert?
What's up? Doing great. Yeah, hot. It's way too hot. If you're not in a place where it's super hot, I envy you. But yeah, I'm doing all right. Ready to do this episode.
All right. And if you want to start your own podcast, I got a couple of recommendations for you. Number one of the easiest ways to start a podcast is at anchor.fm. We put our Last Nighters version on there. It's got free hosting, and there are tools to use your phone to make the podcast. And we don't actually do that part of it. We just do the hosting part. But they couldn't make it any easier. So do check it out, anchor.fm, and look at our site, anchor.fm/lastnighters. And then if you need a website to go along with it, similar to our Actual Anarchy site, Bluehost is offering a deal on Tuesday. So just a couple of days after this episode comes out, Tuesday, July 16th, Bluehost is celebrating its 5th birthday or something like that, and they've got a $2.65 per month web hosting deal. And it's a one-day only deal, so click on our link on actualanarchy.com/blue, and you'll get an excellent price. We'll make a small commission, and we'll give you a shout-out on the show and a couple of other goodies. Just shoot me an email at daniel@actualanarchy.com. Let me know what the website name is that you've signed up with, and we will set you up with a bunch of good stuff. So, again, the link will be found at actualanarchy.com/blue, and we can get into the Last Nighters portion of the show in just a moment here. You good with that, Robert?
Yeah, checks out. Sounds good.
All right, she's clean, Bob. Do 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 do. Hey everyone, it's Daniel and Robert, the Last Nighters, and we're going to be talking about the King's Speech tonight on the 28th episode of the Last Nighters. You can find the show notes and more at lastnighters.com/28. How you doing there, Robert?
Hey, buddy. How's it going? How you doing?
It's going. It's
You're
doing.
looking good.
It's doing, and it's going.
Yeah.
So the Last Nighters is now on the Launchpad Media, where they're always throwing ideas in your direction, new ideas. So they've got exclusive shows and content, so do check that out at thelaunchpadmedia.com. The word the is very important for the URL. So thelaunchpadmedia.com. Check it out. And let's get into the Google description of The King's Speech. Came out in 2010. Drama history, 1 hour, 59 minutes. Available on the Netflix. It has an 8 out of 10 on IMDb, 95% Rotten Tomatoes, 88% Metacritic, and 89% of Google users like it. So it's got near universal acclaim, but we'll see what we do to it by the end of this. And the description is thus. England's Prince Albert, played by Colin Firth, must ascend the throne as King George VI, but he has a speech impediment. Knowing that the country needs her husband to be able to communicate effectively, Elizabeth, Helena Bonham Carter, hires Lionel Logue, Geoffrey Rush, an Australian actor and speech therapist, to help him overcome his stammer. An extraordinary friendship develops between the two men as Logue uses unconventional means to teach the monarch how to speak with confidence. Release date of November 26, 2010. Director Tom Hooper, and it won a couple of awards. And yeah, there you go. What do you think? What do you say, Robert?
Well, that's pretty much what the movie is. Yeah, I mean, it's. Did it say? I forget if it said that, but it's set at the beginning of World War II.
It does not mention it in the description. but it does say it's important that her husband communicate effectively, so they go and get the therapist.
I mean, I don't think anything he does is important, but okay. I mean, surely the people listening probably in the movie and everybody acts like he's important and what he does and says is important. I would say it's probably more counterproductive to any kind of good things happening. But, I mean, we could get into that if you want. I mean, you know, even in a free society, and I say this a lot, even in a free society, you know, one of the things that gets thrown at us is, well, what are you going to do about if somebody invades? And we mentioned this many times that, you know, Tojo didn't want to invade the United States not because of the government, but because there was a rifle behind every blade of grass. And people would come together to defend a land that is getting invaded. Maybe not to the level of, you know, nuclear bombs and B-52s and that sort of thing, or maybe it would. I don't know. But maybe in this situation, do you really need somebody to get up and make a speech about why you gotta defend your country, I guess? I don't know. Daniel, did you think anything he did was important?
No, not really. I mean, all it was just stirring up the fires of the population to be willing to go out and fight for the elites of, you know, the rulers of that population. I mean, the very opening was of the Empire exhibition, which was, I think, in, 1928 or something like that, where the stutter is first put on display, where Prince Albert is addressing the audience, and there's 58 subjugated countries participating in the Empire exhibition, and a quarter of the world population is under their rule. And it just really struck me as, like, they literally spoke themselves as the Empire. I mean, I always thought that calling something the Empire was like saying that they're bad, you know, like Star Wars style. Like, hey, that's the Empire. There's some bad motherfuckers right there.
Yeah, but it had a completely different connotation inside the Empire because they had the idea that they were bringing, you know, civilization to a bunch of savages. You know, I'm sure they thought it was a great thing.
Well, and there probably was a degree of that, certainly. Like, not everything that Western man has done has been pure evil, despite what you've probably learned in your history courses. There were actually, like, terrible things happening in those societies before Western man was involved. And they also did bad shit, but they also put a stop to a lot of bad shit. There's a great talk by Ralph Raico that is part of this Mises home study course that I've done, and it's about the European miracle and why it was able to happen. And I'll put a link to that on our show notes page. It's a great, fascinating listen. But he just takes on the whole concept of the European man being the destroyer of the world. Well, one of the points he makes is European man had amassed the wealth to be able to do that much harm, right? Like, he had the capacity, the excess capacity with which to do it. So how did he have so much wealth, right? And then what of the practices of those native peoples? Were they pristine angels, unsullied by human nature? Or were they up to terrible, terrible shit? You know, and these are questions that never get asked when you're talking about your high school or your college history courses.
Sure. Yeah, I would recommend, or at least recognize that you really have a situation where there's, you know, the winners and the losers. You know, if the situation had been reversed, would these people with a similar mindset just do the same thing? Because really you're talking about, you know, this authoritarian spreading your ideas around the world and thinking that you're the best and you want to make the world in your image. And like you said, I mean, the people that they're conquering aren't necessarily angels, but I still don't think it's necessarily, like, defensible. I'm not going to sit here and say that, you know, British troops landing in South Africa just because and then conquering a bunch of, you know, African tribes is, like, defensible in that sense. It's definitely an NAP violation. But you're right. I mean, once they do conquer those people, they are bringing in things and they're building roads and, you know, telephone lines and electricity and, you know, running water and all sorts of things that is in a way improving the lives of some of those people. But you also could have done that exact same thing in a peaceful way. You could have sold them that stuff. You could have traded with them. You wouldn't have necessarily needed to, you know, conquer a people and subjugate them at the end of a sword.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, my only point is that it's not purely an evil undertaking that was happening, right? There were other evils in the world. But I think that humanity, society in general, has evolved and gone through several stages of enlightenment, and I think that we're still working towards one where we actually have a recognition of individual freedom on the level that you and I advocate. And by no means were they there, you know, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, not even today. We're working on it, and I think that the internet is the new Gutenberg press, which is allowing people of like mind to come together and exchange ideas and promote messages. That's what we do on our show, talking about movies from the free market, unconventional, real unconventional film analysis from a free market perspective. That's what we do. So I think that essentially we're not there yet, and they were even further away from the ideal back then, back when the British Empire, which took over from the Dutch Empire, which took over from the French Empire, which took over from the Spanish Empire, and on and on and on, right? Going back and back, like empires rise and fall. So anyway, I didn't mean to derail us into this, but let's talk about Lionel Logue, if you don't mind, unless you have anything else to add for our opening here.
No. Let's go ahead. Let's start off with Logue.
All right, so Logue impressed me because even after he knew that this was the prince and royalty and whatever, he was still like, my house, my rules, my turf, you're going to do what I ask you to do because you're here and you're seeking my assistance, my help with your problem. So he was a no shit taker for the most part. I mean, he as it wore on, he acquiesced a bit, but I was really impressed with his no-nonsense attitude. What are your thoughts on Lionel Logue?
Well, he was the one person in this movie who, upon learning that he's talking to, the prince, and then he becomes the king, and the Duchess, right? The Duke and Duchess of Windsor, is that who they are? And then they become the king and the queen.
They were York, but yes.
Okay, well, York, whatever. But it's good to be exact. So he's the only one that doesn't immediately start bowing and scraping and groveling before these people, which is just, when you see it from my point of view, is just disgusting. And just people, finds out that you're a royal person, then all of a sudden they're like bowing and, please forgive me, great lord. And Logue is just like, yeah, okay, what's up? You want to do this? You're doing it on my terms. And I'm calling you Bertie. And we're equals here in this room, and that's the only way this is going to work. And you're going to deal with me making you uncomfortable and talking about things you don't want to talk about. Because he's basically a psychologist. He's trying to get at the root of why Bertie's stuttering, it's clearly, he demonstrates in their very first meeting why it's not a mechanical issue. It's a mental issue. Not to say that the brain isn't mechanical, but you know what I'm saying. And so he's, throughout the movie, it's him testing the boundaries, trying to get this prince guy to get comfortable with him enough to open up, to try and really understand and get at, the reason why he's stuttering. And that was one thing that I thought was really kind of missing from the movie, is that one scene where he kind of understands, and there's like a revelation. And this is why I've been stuttering this whole time. It's because of this, because of these expectations or whatever it is. That we never get that scene. And maybe that's why at the very end, like all of a sudden he's just kind of smooth on this speech, and we're not really sure why. He says he stutters a little bit, but he says that was intentional. I don't know. I was kind of missing that scene where we actually got some revelation as to why he was a stutterer, but we never do. And for me, that was what, it kind of fell flat for me.
Yeah, there were allusions to it. He talked around it, like, oh, are you actually left-handed, but they made you be right-handed? And there was a few other things he picked up on that were like, oh, your father basically forced you to be not how you are, and then your brother made fun of you, and it kind of pronounced this stutter. It brought it along. It was like in Billy Madison, today, Junior. That kind of action.
Right. Yeah. Throughout the movie, there are hints, and we're like, oh, is that the reason? Is this the reason? Is that the reason? But there's never, and maybe it's all of those reasons, but we're never given a scene where, maybe it's something he did actually struggle with his whole life. And so then there isn't a Hollywood moment where all of a sudden, the light bulb flips on and all of a sudden he realizes what it was and he can move past it and now he doesn't stutter anymore. Maybe it really was a lifelong struggle that he just went through and this guy is just slowly helping him. And then we end on the speech. So maybe it is a little more realistic. So maybe that's for the best. I don't know. Maybe, but it didn't. If you're going to tell a movie where the character is struggling with this thing, he's got a problem, and he's going to a guy to help him with that problem, and then we don't resolve that problem, it just feels a little bit weird at the end. A little bit unsettling for the movie to be about him having a problem and going to see that problem fixed and then not fixing that problem, and then the end. That's just... Well, I don't know.
Maybe not fixing the problem, but certainly strongly improving upon it, right? Like his position was much better at the end than at the beginning, even though he still needed Logue there to kind of coach him in the moment, right? And walk him through it ahead of time and distract him and get him to do his like tippy toes and dancing around exercises and fuck, shit, piss, fuck, cock, that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, that's the good stuff.
Yeah, that was a hilarious scene. But one of the big reasons that this was brought up and recommended to us was because it's revealed towards the end that Logue is neither a doctor nor has any formal training or credentials or anything related to speech therapy, psychology, any of it. And so that can lead us full on into the whole, occupational licensing and permit discussion, sanctioning by government and all of that.
Yeah, let's do that. I mean, we've mentioned this sort of thing before, but if you're new to the show, this is one of our bread and butter type of things. Occupational licensing is just a way for entrenched professionals to artificially lower the amount of competition that they're going to face. So Logue is doing what he's doing just because he's good at doing it. And he doesn't need somebody's permission. He doesn't need somebody's little stamp of approval. All he's doing is saying, hey, I can help you with this thing. Do you want help with this thing? Okay, pay me, and I'll help you with this thing. And that's it. I mean, if it happened today in the United States, this guy would be in jail, or he would be, either in jail for false, false practice or something like that. Who knows? They'll just come up with some reason. As soon as somebody, because there is a scene in the movie where he finds out that he doesn't have, or he realizes it, nobody that gets around the king doesn't get scrutinized by Scotland Yard and whoever else. And he all of a sudden discovers that, or he suddenly is mad about it for whatever reason. And they have a scene where they're kind of talking about it, and Logue immediately slaps him down. He's like, yeah, I never said I was a doctor. I just said I could help. Do you want help? I'll help.
Yeah, and the doctors that he'd seen, and he'd seen them all, were ineffective, right? They didn't solve his problem. That's why they kept going through doctor after doctor. That's how the movie kind of opens, right? And then they eventually get to Logue, who is on this off-alley type street that isn't known for, the best purveyors to be. And the other doctors were telling him to smoke to calm his nerves and inhale it into his lungs to relax his throat, and sticking marbles in his mouth and having him try to read out of a book. And it reminded me of my wife and I when we were living on an island. We went to this apportation medium, I don't want to call him an illusionist, but it was almost like a magic show, but it was he was supposed to be channeling spirits or something like that. And he would regurgitate crystals and stones out of his mouth and say weird shit about Jesus and old philosophers from Greece and things like that. Yeah, he was an apportation medium. So anyway, that scene with the marbles reminded me of that. And my wife and I, we were invited to this thing. It was weird. I don't know what it is with islands around here, but on our last episode, no, wait, not the last episode, on our Wild Country discussion with the guys at Liberty Weekly, Robert, you had mentioned that you went to an island. Might have even been the same island, and got into some weird cult meeting type stuff.
Yeah, the weirdos go out to islands in Puget Sound. It's where they go, and if you're looking for that kind of stuff, that's where you'll find it. It's good times. If you ever need content for a podcast, or I don't know if you're like James Randi or somebody, just go out there and you can talk to all kinds of interesting people.
Yeah,
who've got interesting ideas.
They're out on an island for a reason. But anyway. The other thing I wanted to mention, I meant to say this earlier just to make fun of you, but when Birdie first is introduced to Logue, they say that Johnson was his alias because it didn't seem very important.
That's a good burn. That's a really good burn. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well done, Daniel. Touché.
Well done. I wish I'd done that a little bit better. Oh, hey, one other thing I wanted to ask you. We did the Harry Potter movie last week, and was the little character who greeted them at their very first official session, was that little Ron Weasley, the character Willie?
One of the Logue's sons?
I don't think he was one of Logue's sons. I think he was a patient. And he greets them, and then they come in and they go, yeah, Willie, he hadn't been able to speak, so his mother had me working with him. But it looked just like Ron Weasley.
If that looks like Ron Weasley to you, then let's say it's Ron Weasley, because I don't remember. It didn't stick out to me that it was Ron Weasley, but it very well could have been. I don't know, when was this movie made?
2010.
Oh, okay, then it couldn't have been. Because Ron Weasley is like a little kid. He's 10 years old in 2001's Harry Potter, so he would have been 20 years old.
Oh, well, never mind. Never mind. All right, well, back to the occupational licensing. So the official doctors who had the credentials and the education and the certifications and the permits and the license and all that crap were recommending that he smoke and do stupid shit. So
yeah, and that leads to one of the funniest scenes in the movie, if not the funniest, where the prince is telling Logue that, Logue is telling the prince that sucking smoke is bad, and then the prince is like, well, no, my doctor says it relaxes the throat, and then he says, well, they're idiots then, and they said, well, they've been knighted, and then he goes, well, then it's official. Which is cute.
All right.
But what did you think about Firth's acting in this movie? This seemed to be just like a Firth kind of showcase. This reminded me of, well, one of, probably Geoffrey Rush's most famous movie, My Left Foot, where they play somebody with some kind of disability, and it's always kind of celebrated. If you can pull off some sort of disability consistently for a whole movie, like the world cheers. And there's a certain amount of impressing that goes on. I mean, I thought he was the best actor in the movie, but he also had the most to work with. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Now, wasn't it Daniel Day-Lewis who was in My Left Foot? I know Rush is famous for being a...
Oh, yeah, you're right. It's the piano movie. What's the piano one? Shine? That's it.
Shine. Yep. Yeah, but you're right. I mean,
I knew it was some movie where they got some disability.
Right, and My Left Foot is one, and Shine is one, and wasn't there one with Sean Penn, Milk? Wasn't he?
Not Milk. It was the one where he's works at Starbucks and he's got a little girl. He's got Dakota Fanning.
Oh yeah, I don't remember the name of it.
Milk is the one where he's the politician. What is the one where he's half retarded?
Yeah. Anyway, some of our listeners will know what we're talking about, and this is of course what Robert Downey Jr. in blackface makes fun of in Tropic Thunder, where he says, "You never go full retard."
Yes, that's right.
Bringing it all together. Firth's performance I felt was really good because he was struggling, right, and he was doing that very believably, and he was a bit of a cunt, like when Birdie would get angry and his stutter would go away, when he'd swear and get angry, but man, he was quick tempered. He was a big jerk.
Yeah, and he also, insisted that he was called, the prince or, his royal highness or whatever title or whatever, as if his status of birth means he's better than you. And the way that the doctor smacked that down was really nice.
Yeah. And then when Birdie said to him, I hope you're not charging me too much money. And Rush still takes no shit and defies him at every turn. And he says, I'm charging you a bloody fortune.
Yeah, as if the other guy even would know.
Yeah, because he doesn't even carry money, right? He doesn't even have to worry about peasantry types of things.
Yep, that's something the little people have to worry about.
Yeah, with his picture on it.
Let's talk. Let's switch it up just a little bit, unless you got some more on this particular line. The other main issue in this movie, not necessarily issue, but whatever, another thing to talk about here, is the whole issue with his brother getting married to this divorced woman, or this non-divorced woman,
about to be twice divorced.
Right. And because the king is the head of the church, but the church doesn't recognize divorced women as marriage eligible, I suppose. So then he has to abdicate before he can marry her, and that's what ends up happening. But I mean, since when do these people not just do whatever the hell they want anyway? I mean, if he's the head of the church, can't he then recognize divorced women or just do what he wants? Or are these people really beholden to the ridiculous rules that other people in their exact same position have made up?
Yeah, it seems like, they were citing a constitution, which, as far as I'm aware, at the time at least, they didn't even have a written constitution in England. And I don't know if they do now or not. Not that it really makes that big of a difference when it comes down to it, because George W. Bush was right. It's just a goddamn piece of paper, and they just ignored it every turn anyway. But I think that was one of the distinctions that was made when the colonies broke away, is like, hey, we're tired of having this verbal contract issue or situation. We want to write this thing down.
I really appreciated the scene where the prime minister is talking to the king, or maybe he's talking to Bertie, and he's saying, well, if the king doesn't abdicate, the government will resign.
Oh, yes, please.
I was like, oh, no. Oh, my stars and garters. Clutch my pearls. What's going to happen to us all? If only. If only.
Yeah, and just moments before, he was realizing how little the common man knew of him and how little he knew of the common man. It's like, yeah, exactly. So why are you ruling them?
Yeah, it reminded me of all the times when, the government threatens to shut down unless they pass some budget increase. And then, life just continues on regardless of what happens. Oh, no, the senators aren't robbing on this particular day? Yeah. Anyway.
Well, they never officially stop.
Well, they take away the things that people actually use, like national parks and other things like that. They don't stop, tax collection or the military. They don't shut that stuff down. They don't shut down, do they shut down Congress? I don't know.
Maybe, but yeah, they call that the Washington Monument Syndrome, and that's at the national level. But even the local school districts do the same thing, So they'll do things like, oh no, we're gonna have to cut the football budget. We won't be able to have band anymore because of budget cuts. Meanwhile, they get 17 vice principals, and so people are doing bake sales and selling candy bars or doing car washes to raise money to buy uniforms.
Yep.
And it's just all the conspicuous stuff they threaten.
They only take away the stuff you like. They don't take away the stuff you hate. It's like we don't have enough money, so we're gonna stop, setting up speed traps we're going to stop tax collection. They never do that. We're going to stop all the wars, because we just ran out of money, so we can't bomb all the countries that we want to bomb. That's never the case.
Willy shit and fuck and tits. That's the other thing he said during his little his rant, where Rush showed him that he can speak without stuttering.
One thing this movie does really illustrate well, I thought, was the religious nature of the state and the hand-in-hand nature of the state and the church in British society as means of control over the people. They were hand-in-hand, like the pomp and the circumstance and the ceremonies and the costumes of both the religious people and the monarchy is all like in full effect. Like these are people, are special and important, and they're, you need them or else, they're the only thing keeping the bad people away. And it just really illustrated the religious aspect of statism.
Yeah, and I think in the U.S. that it's less the religious aspect these days. I mean, not that the state isn't a religion in and of itself, but I think that they go toward the intellectuals for their cover now. So that's sort of the joint strike effort against the population, is to have the experts, the academics, the talking heads provide cover for the politicians to justify everything that they do. Meanwhile, they get a seat at the table and a little taste of the glory. So
is it even a dispute that anytime there's a war, like the mainstream media, CNN, MSNBC, just in lockstep behind in support of it?
Or goose step.
Right. And they're just cheerleading on every war. They've never, lately, I don't remember, I guess I don't remember the George W. Bush administration as much as I should, but I don't remember CNN just cheering on the first Iraq war.
Well, you mean the first one back in 91?
The second one. I get confused. There's
so many. They all look the same.
That's right.
Yeah, I want to say that there was a little bit more resistance to Bush in media at the time. I feel like there was a bit more anti-war sentiment going on and people actually protesting. I think the left was better at that at the time, and then when Obama came in and essentially doubled down on all the same failed Bush policies, but he got a free pass, and if you criticized him for doing the thing Bush was doing, you were a racist.
Indeed. Yeah, it's funny how, I don't know, how much influence the mainstream media seem to have over the general popular opinion in the United States. And maybe they're only reporting on their own biases because, clearly, Trump won the election in 2016, so they weren't always right. But, the anti-war left just disappeared.
Yeah, I thought they'd be coming back.
Under
I
Obama.
thought they'd come out of hibernation, but they haven't, I'm really surprised by this.
But if the mainstream media were still to report on the wars, honestly, truthfully, I was recently watching the Ken Burns Vietnam documentary, and I have my issues with it. It's not perfect, but back then, like every night, there would be some horrific massacre on the news, and as a result of that, there was a massive anti-war movement. And I don't know if it was just Obama's policy of you can't show this on TV anymore that did it, or the mainstream media just stopped covering it like that, or just stopped covering it at all. And that's why the anti-war movement went to sleep. It seems like people aren't necessarily principled. It's just, they're kind of like dogs chasing sticks, and whatever they see in front of them at the time is what they're upset about.
Yeah, crows and
so if
shiny
the mainstream
objects.
Media, if the mainstream media reports on the war, they're upset about the war. But if they report on somebody saying a bad word, they're upset about that person saying a bad word. Like all of a sudden Roseanne is like a Nazi and Papa John's guy is a Nazi and whatever. Not that, millions of people aren't dying and being starved to death and whatever. That's not anything to get upset about.
Yeah, and when Trump got elected, I really did have hope that the anti-war left would come out of hiding. But they really haven't. And, it's really bizarre. And we'll get back to the King's speech in a minute. But I was expecting it, right? I was expecting them to hate Trump for everything, legitimate or not. And it seems like they focus on the dumb shit. Sure, some of it is, obviously horrific. Like he's a quote-unquote leader of a country, the biggest mafia gang. He's going to do some terrible shit. But they're totally ignoring the really, really, really bad stuff, the foreign wars and occupations and shit like that. If it's like they're looking for any little thing to be mad at him about, when there's plenty just right there in front of you to be upset about, legitimately.
Yeah, if he dropped a bomb that killed 50,000 people, but he also called them like a slur, a
shithole country,
there would be 10 times the outrage about the slur than about the murder. I don't know if people think that the murder is legitimate. Like, oh well, he's got reasons to do that, but there's no good reason to say bad words about them. I don't really understand it. Maybe because I just have this luxuriant position of having a principle that I follow and understand.
Well, he wasn't presidential until he dropped bombs. Do you remember that?
I do remember that. I think CNN said that.
Yeah.
That was like Wolf Blitzer. So good times.
Yeah, so
That's where we're
totally
at
flipped
with
the
the
script.
principles these days.
All right, well, back to this movie. There was another funny line that I really enjoyed, and it was where they had bet the shilling on whether he could read the, is it Hamlet, right? The soliloquy. Here I am stuttering. Today, Junior, which was the thing that Eric, the Weasley guy, and Billy Madison said during their competition, their academic decathlon. To be or not to be. Anyway, so they bet the shilling. And when Logue finally won it, Bertie said to him, I have no idea what an Australian might do for that amount of money. I thought that was funny.
Because of they got dollar dues down in Australia? Is that what he's talking about?
It was 1 shilling, but I think he was making allusions to him, turning tricks or something.
Good times. When you're the king or high in royalty, everyone else is just beneath you.
Yeah. Hey, what did you think about when the father, the king originally, who was doing the Christmas address,
It was Dumbledore.
Dumbledore was telling him, hey, back when I was young, you just had to look respectable in uniform and not fall off your horse. And now with this radio, this new technology, now you've got to invade the homes of the citizens and ingratiate yourself to them.
Yeah, do they really? I think that was him giving a woe is me speech. I mean, seriously, since when do the royals have some sort of expectancy put on them? I mean, what are their obligations? What do they do? What does Queen Elizabeth do? She sits in a chair and waves every once in a while? I mean, there's a scene where, Bertie is worried about the pressures of being a king. And I'm just like, really? What pressures? I mean, do you really even... I mean, if he hadn't given those speeches, so what? You're king. You can tell somebody else to give a speech.
Well, Hitler might have won.
What are the consequences of him not giving that speech? Is he going to be ousted? Or is he going to be overthrown? What everybody in that country seems to worship the guy. The whole family. They have such amount of pride wrapped up in their national identity with the royal family that they could do anything they want, essentially. I mean, as long as they're not barbecuing babies on their front lawn.
They could probably get away with that,
what
too,
do they got to
honestly.
worry about? What do they got to worry about? And probably, they could get away with that.
Yeah, I mean, they got away with the nanny pinching him and not feeding him.
Yes. But, I mean, in terms of the way everybody treated them, I mean, the only one who even treated him like another human being was Logue. Everybody else was just bowing and scraping and, oh, King, you're so great. Oh, my God, what a majestic speech. Everybody applaud this guy. Oh, how incredible is this person? And at the very end of the show, after he gives a speech, then he just stands out on some balcony and everybody's just waving and cheering just to get a glimpse of him. Gross. This whole movie's gross.
I agree, it is gross, but I can also see a little bit of believability in the isolation that he had. Even though he was surrounded by people, he didn't have a real friend or connection on a social level. If everyone's bowing and scraping all the time, how do you really get to know anyone? So in a way, even though he's surrounded by people, he's still isolated. And we've talked about ostracism multiple times on the show before. So he had a type of ostracism happening with him that I'm sure was affecting him.
Right. I mean, this is like the Michael Jackson type situation, like the glass menagerie, where you're so famous you can't do anything.
Yeah. You can't even
just
go out
be a normal person
to the grocery store or whatever.
Right, without being mobbed. So Michael Jackson would rent out the entire theater because he couldn't just go; he would just get mobbed. Well, you know what? Boo-hoo. Seriously, boo-hoo.
Yeah, that problem goes away.
This is a person,
if you don't have rulers.
Yeah, this is a person whose whole existence is predicated upon theft, and coercion and violence. So you get no sympathy points for living a life that is separate from everybody else. I mean, he was in a situation where he could at least walk down the street. People didn't recognize him. It's not like he's on TV. There aren't print magazines all the time with tabloid stuff where the prince and the whatever are having a baby or they go out on the town, so they dress in a new outfit and that makes headlines for some reason. I don't know. I don't mean to shit on things people find interesting, but these people are lauded and celebrated for literally doing nothing, for existing. And because people think that they're living such a fabulous lifestyle. I mean, it's one thing if these people had actually accomplished something in their life, like a Steve Jobs type or something, and, there were tabloid magazines about Steve Jobs and how great he was, or Thomas Edison at the time, or, whoever, somebody who's really contributing, like Thomas, Ford or whoever. But no, these are people that exist to threaten, rob, and nothing else. Literally nothing else. I mean, if you want to argue that these people are diplomats and, it increases the stability of society, well, you're not going to get that argument from me. You could make that argument, and sure, there is a pragmatic, real-world argument you could make that there are good diplomats and bad ones and good monarchs and bad ones. Sure, they're all on a scale, I suppose. But you're not going to argue, I'm not going to argue that monarchs are a positive thing in the world. They are probably preferable to democracy for reasons that have been well made on this podcast and others. But no, I advocate a world that is where coercion and violent aggression is looked upon with, horror. It's not legal. It's rightfully abhorred.
Indeed, sir. I agree. Now, there was a moment that I thought was interesting, and this shows my lack of understanding of how the relationship between the king and the government worked in England. But he was saying, where's my power? Can I form a government? Can I levy a tax? Can I declare a war? And he couldn't do any of those things. And it seemed odd to me because isn't he sort of like the figurehead of a government? And couldn't he just decree that a government exists? And couldn't he levy a tax? And couldn't he declare war? Or are they more of just figureheads for show? Do you understand the relationship in the UK related to that dichotomy?
I don't exactly know, but I could speculate. I mean, I think back during the Magna Carta days, that was a big concession, right, from the king to the mercantile class, that the king couldn't just do anything he wanted at all times or something like that. So that's kind of like ever since then, their powers have largely been eroded, and it's been more of a democratic process over there, which is why you've got the House of Lords and the House of Commons. And I think that they have mainly, taken control of the law writing and the law creation and declaring war. And that's why you have that movie, Darkest Hour, which I don't know if we want to do that one or not, but it's about World War II, and it's about Churchill and, deciding whether or not they're going to go to war with Germany in World War II and that sort of thing. So, I don't think it was the king's decision to necessarily do that. He's more of a figurehead. Exactly what power they have, I don't know. Maybe are they the ones that appoint, like the prime minister? Maybe kind of like the U.S. president over here appoints the Fed chairman. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, but it does seem like perhaps it's a bit of a steam release valve, Like, here's the king, the royal family, and that's for the adulation of the adoring public. Meanwhile, the government over here, under cover of the king, is the one actually doing all the law enforcement and taxing and all of those things. So it, gives them a happy face. It's like good cop, bad cop, right?
Yeah, it's look at these people. These are your rulers, but they're good people. They're not really doing anything bad. And then you got your parliament, and they're doing all the bad stuff, and you hate them. But you actually look upon your royal family favorably because they're just kind of like figureheads of the nation, I suppose. I could see that.
Yeah. And then even the parliament might get a little bit of a pass because, you could always run for parliament, right? That could be you one day.
Yeah, we're the people. Government's people, right?
Right. And
Yep.
Robert, if you don't like it, you can either leave or throw your hat in the ring, and may the best ideas win. You can go and get elected and go and get
Gross,
your
Daniel.
ideas out there and promoted and voted
Gross. Yes. Right. Yes. I've heard this argument before. It's a terrible
on.
argument.
It is an awful argument.
Completely unconvincing.
You got to join the mafia to try to make the mafia less mafia-like.
Yeah. So to that, yeah, exactly. Is the mafia argument is the perfect counter to that. So if the mafia held elections tomorrow, would you vote? Would you join the mafia? That's how we look upon government.
By what right?
It's a group of people.
By divine right.
Exactly. Divine right of kings. Suck it.
All right. So I wanted to go back to the occupational licensing just for a few minutes while we wind this down and then do our final summary and review because we're getting close to the end here. But the the relationship between the king and the church, the archbishop is he's the worm tongue in his ear, right? And he rats out Logue and tells the king, hey, he's got no training, no diploma, he's not a doctor, he's got no qualifications. And we've already sort of addressed this earlier. Logue's rebuttal was, well, I get results. I helped shell-shocked veterans from World War I. My only credentials are success. And there were no programs at the time, so there was no way to be credentialed to do this. And then the king says to him, he'll charge him with fraud and throw him in the tower.
Yeah. That whole scene kind of confused me because the king is really angry with him, for no reason. And then he does an abrupt 180 when Logue actually points out the reasonable answer. It's like, what? You're here this whole time he's helping you. You're getting improvement. And then you feel betrayed because he doesn't have somebody's signature on some piece of paper somewhere? What exactly are you complaining about?
Right, and the irony of this is like right before they're going to do this ceremony in Westminster Abbey, where he literally has to kiss the book, sign the oath, and you're the king. Well,
Yeah, and say like 3 words or something.
right, yeah. So
Answer a couple of
if
questions.
you're worried about credentials, all he's got to do is kiss a book and sign an oath. Like, what credentials does he have to be the king?
Well, he was born that way, Daniel. Clearly, he's qualified.
Lady Gaga would be proud. He was born that way.
Listen, women lying in ponds distributing swords is no means for a basis of government. If I went around calling myself an emperor just because some moistened being lobbed a scimitar at me, they'd throw me away. And yes, I butchered that quote. Sorry, you get the point.
I do, yes. Monty Python. We should do some Monty Python. They have some really great, stellar work. But
Yeah, Life of Brian and Holy Grail, fantastic. So many good things.
yeah, we'll have to get that into the mix. But let's get into our final summary and review. And I'll let you go first, but I do want to just give you a starting point. The speech at the end, while delivered fairly well with heavy amounts of coaching, was very gross and full of hypocrisy, where they said they must go to war to prove that might does not make right. So he has to use might to make right, to negate right by might.
Well, I don't see why you're confused. That makes total sense. Yeah, if you're looking for consistency from a group that predicates itself on violence and coercion while at the same time pretending that it's virtuous and benevolent, you're barking at the wrong tree. But, I was kind of just grossed out this whole movie. I thought it was interesting, Helena Bonham Carter without a ton of makeup on, which is interesting. She did all right. Geoffrey Rush was perfectly good. And then British McBritish-faced guy had the most to work with. I thought he was really good. Almost to the point where it was painful to watch his scenes. He's like stuttering. Watching anybody with a speech impediment is really kind of difficult. You just want him to like get it out, say what you're gonna say. Let's move this plot along. But for what it was well done. I can see why it got the critical acclaim that it did. But these movies that glorify thugs and murderers and claim that they're benevolent defenders of the people, it's funny because they actually do get to defend the people at times, and by defend the people, I mean, conscript the people to defend themselves, which they would do anyway. But, when Hitler declares war on Britain, or did Britain declare war on Hitler? I think it was the other way around. I think they didn't get, right? They had a certain deadline to hit, and then they didn't hit that deadline, so then war was automatically declared because Germany invaded Belgium, and then they had a defense pact with Belgium, and so then they had to go and defend it, or at least according to the pact. I don't know. It gets all complicated.
Something like that, though.
If anybody's interested, yeah. There are plenty of documentaries and podcasts that detail that big time. So I'm sure you can check that out if you're really interested, or if you're just hearing about this for the first time on this podcast, which I find very hard to believe. Anyway, this movie, it's competently made, but God, I just can't get past the subject matter. It's really hard for me to get past the subject matter. So I'm going to give 2 numbers. From a pure movie perspective, this movie's like a 7.6 or something like that. Like, it's well made, it's well acted, it's well written for the most part. It's historically somewhat accurate, at least it seems to be. I mean, those names are all the same, and his daughter Elizabeth becomes the queen, and blah, blah, blah. But from my personal taste as a voluntarist, I can't give this movie anything above like a 3. It's just gross. This is not a movie I would come back to or watch again. It's to watch people just bow and scrape before people just because they were birthed by other people that you would want to bow and scrape to for some reason. It's just gross. Daniel, what's your score?
Well, I'm going to give just one number, and I think it's going to be based mostly on just the craft of the movie, and it was interesting to watch, and I really had an appreciation for Logue not taking any shit despite who his client was, so I enjoyed that part of it. The other thing I really liked was how the movie was shot. There was something about like the scenes where they had a lot of negative space. Did you notice this in the movie? Where the main characters, when they were speaking, they were sort of off to one side and the background was very large. And like it was really prominent in Logue's office where he was treating Bertie. And Bertie would be on the couch speaking, and there's that really textured and reddish and greenish wall behind him with a lot going on in it. Those types of scenes really stood out to me. So I think that this was a well-crafted, beautifully shot film, and the actors were all pretty excellent. I agree with you that the storyline was kind of pointless to begin with. I mean, sure, there's historical, value there. But likewise, as a voluntarist, I find the whole concept to be antithetical to my belief system. So that part of it was hard to watch. But I'm glad that it got recommended. It gave us a little bit to chew on the occupational licensing stuff, and I'm sure we'll get into that again on future episodes. But my number is a 7.7 overall for this one.
Yeah, I just, if he doesn't give the speech, which is what the whole movie is about, what happens? Usually in a movie, you want the protagonist to accomplish a thing, to stop a thing, or to be able to do a thing, like an important thing that needs to be done, or else bad things happen. Literally none of that happens here. The guy gets a little bit better at talking, and then the movie ends. I don't know, man. For some reason, it still kept my attention, and they made a good movie out of it. I gotta give him props.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the craft was there, and the interest in the story was there, even though the events weren't all that exciting. So, even better of a job on their part.
Yeah, they took chicken shit, made chicken salad out of it. Well done.
All right. Well, there are a couple of other things I wanted to mention. The last 2 episodes have been based on movies in England. I think we're going to go more domestic on the next run. We're going to do Mission Impossible because the new Mission Impossible is coming out on the 27th. I think that one is called Mission Impossible Fallout. So we're going to go back to the Tom Cruise movie that started it all, at least the franchise portion, with him in it back in 1996. So we're going to be discussing that. And if we have time, perhaps also touch on Ghost Protocol, because I did a poll in our group and some people voted and it was actually a tie between them. But I think we should focus on Mission Impossible 1 from 1996.
Sure, let's do it. Yeah, the new movie is getting really good reviews, and I remember the first movie being pretty good. And I don't know if I'd ever want to watch Ghost Protocol again, as it is my least favorite Mission Impossible of all time, even though I understand it's many people's favorite movie. It might actually be more fun to watch it and just trash the movie the whole time. It might be more fun for me, but I don't know. We'll see. Come back for that episode. It should be fun.
Yeah, it'll be game on. You can certainly trash it all you want. So we'll focus on the first one and maybe trash on Ghost Protocol a little bit. The other thing I wanted to mention is we are now the Last Nighters on the Launchpad Media, where they're always throwing new ideas in your direction. And I'm going to be interviewed with Johnny Rocket on Blast Off with Johnny Rocket. I think that's coming out on the 27th as well. So look for that, an interview with me with Johnny Rocket on the Launchpad Media. And I think that's about it. The show notes can be found for this episode of The Last Nighters at lastnighters.com/28. I do appreciate you joining us for the show. Thank you, our Launchpad listeners and our Last Nighters listeners. And may the two groups mix and commingle. There's lots of great content all over the place. And we really appreciate you guys. Thank you for being our listeners. And I'll say good night from last night. And we're going to continue the broadcast a little bit longer on the Actual Anarchy podcast before we get into perhaps some Kathleen Turner overdrive on this getting hotter by the minute July evening.
Yeah, I'm super sweaty right now. It's just pouring down my face. This is very uncomfortable.
Oh, tell me more. Tell me more.
Oh, yeah.
Well, what I will suggest for Kathleen Turner Overdrive, for our Patreon supporters, you might hear some air conditioners on in the background on both ends of the broadcast. But that's for our, being able to bring you that portion of the show, because otherwise I think we would just end it here. So, Robert, if you're game, we can turn on the air conditioners during KTO and keep talking for a bit.
Yes, please.
All right, well, let's start winding down this Actual Anarchy show. So at the beginning, we mentioned that there's the Bluehost deal on Tuesday, the 16th. Best deals of the year, $265 a month for web hosting. And if you use our link at actualanarchy.com/blue, you'll get that deal. We'll get a small commission, and we'll give you a shout-out on the show. Shoot me an email at daniel@actualanarchy.com and let me know what your website name is, and we'll do a backlink and all that stuff. So that should be really cool. And then our next episode is going to be the Mission Impossible, where we also talk about Ghost Protocol a little bit. And that movie, the new movie, Mission Impossible Fallout, is coming out in theaters on 7/27.
Yeah, buddy. Yeah, stay tuned for that. That should be a fun one.
Oh, and the one other thing I wanted to bring up is that we've been in the midst of doing the Wild Wild Country series with Liberty Weekly. The first episode is out, and you can find that at libertywweekly.net/WWC, and that's going to have the listing of all 6 episodes that will eventually be completed. And I think we're going to be recording the next one fairly soon, perhaps with a guest host, because our friend Patrick, who runs Liberty Weekly, he's studying furiously for the bar exam. So he's having a little bit of trouble keeping up with his obligations, shall we say. But that's been a really fun conversation. And I think we might even have a special guest join us for a later episode towards the end of the month. Robert, I don't know if you're familiar, but Sherry Voluntary is interested in joining us to discuss it because she was actually in a similar situation for many years.
Wow. Sounds cool. Yeah, Sherry Voluntary back on the show. Back from last time she was on was the Boys Not Out episode for the Blade Run, if I recall correctly.
That is correct, yeah. When we did Blade Runner 2049, we did a Boys Night Out after that, and we had two guests on. Sherry was one, and Kyle Mamounis. And Kyle has been writing on our site, actualanarchy.com. He just posted an article on Jurassic Park, so that's now linked up and referenced on the site with our Jurassic Park episode. Super good stuff. He's a very interesting guy, and all good stuff all around. So that's pretty much it for us from Actual Anarchy. This is episode 85. You can find the show notes and more at actualanarchy.com/85. Do appreciate you guys joining us very much. And if you want to get in on the hot Patreon action, go to actualanarchy.com/Patreon and give us a subscribes and likes and shares and comments and messages and all sorts of other good stuff. And we take requests, we respond to things, or we try to. And anything else you want to add before we say goodnight, Robert?
Just want to mention how much of fun this show is, and we really appreciate everybody listening to it. And stay tuned for all our hot new content, man.
All right, thank you and good night. Maximum freedom, everyone.
The Chipmunks. CHIPMUNK. We're the Chipmunks. Guaranteed to brighten your day. Do 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 do.